Nothing like being told we're supposed to love on command. Ready? 1, 2, 3, love. You love him. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. And fortunately, though, we don't have to wait until we've summoned up feelings of love, whatever those are. I mean, they're great, but it's kind of hard to describe, isn't it? We don't have to wait for feelings before we act with love. Love is most basically an action, and it's an action for the good of another. But then, how do we love God? What action can we do that somehow helps God? Jesus says, love God with all your heart and your mind and your soul. And I think the bottom line is your whole self. But I think it's kind of helpful to break it down a little bit, even though it turns out that what Jesus meant by heart is probably a little different than we think of heart. You know, Jesus in his time, in his culture, was probably thinking more complete than we are. We think of the heart maybe as being the seat of just the feeling, but it's the seat of the intellect too, and it's really at the center of things. And the soul is this life force. But even so, let's break it down and maybe even think of it the way we do: heart, mind, and soul. How can we love God with our heart? Especially if, there's no action we can do that God needs from us. We can, one thing we can do is we can give God something. We can give God thanks. We can, each day, we can look around us, look within us, and thank God for what God has given us. What a great way to love God. And with our mind, what can we do? We can search for the truth about God by looking at our lives, by looking at the world around us, in our study, in the Scriptures, in our conversations, in our prayer. We can search for the truth about God. What better way to love somebody than to seek out knowledge about them, which is the grounds for love, isn't it? To know someone is to love that person. Really, probably to know anyone, even the seemingly most evil person, if we really know them at their deepest levels, right? If we really know what motivates them, what pain they've gone through, then we can love them. How can we love God with our souls? We can pray, and we can ask God for what we need. Jesus says the second commandment. Of course, the guy didn't ask for a second commandment, but you always get more than you bargain for with Jesus. And he says the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. How is the second commandment like the first? I thought, well, okay, let's go through these three things again with the neighbor. How can we love our neighbor with our hearts? Some neighbors, it's easier than others to kind of feel the love, right? How can we love our neighbor with our hearts? Again, I'm looking for an action, not a feeling. So we can simply walk with them. We can enter into a relationship with them. In fact, that's what our Burundi project is all about. It'll be too slow maybe for some, but the idea when we gather next Sunday morning at 11 is to start finding out how we can walk with our brothers and sisters in Burundi, how we can enter into a relationship with them. And study and prayer and getting to know our brothers and sisters will lead us eventually to knowing what we can do for them, what they can do for us. They can let us know explicitly, and maybe we'll get to know, too, what we can do so we can walk with our neighbor. What about with our minds? How can we love our neighbor? We can get to know them. The first Newman Center director I worked with, Nathan, and I've told you this more than once, is he taught me that the first thing he likes to do if somebody's really upset with him is, instead of trying right away to work it out with them, is just sit down with them and get to know each other better. And it can really lay the groundwork, right, for then working through whatever the challenges are. So we really get to know our neighbor. And what about with our souls? We can pray for them. We can pray with them. The second commandment is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. So, okay, it's hard to ignore that self part. How can we love ourselves with our hearts? Even when we look in the mirror and aren't feeling the love. One way, and these are all just some of the ways, right? But one way I've been praying about this week is we can accept ourselves. That's an action. It's maybe an elusive action. It's maybe not the most concrete action, accept ourselves. But maybe to make it concrete, what does accepting myself look like? It means maybe not trying to change every aspect of myself, not having unreasonable expectations of myself. We can accept ourselves. What about with our minds? Well, we can get to know ourselves better too, right? We can always get to know ourselves better. Our failings, our weaknesses, our strengths. That's sometimes harder for us, isn't it? The gifts we've been given. Get to know our aspirations, our desires. And most of all, get to know God's love for us. How can we love ourselves with our soul? Well, we can pray. And now I'm talking about that prayer I'm always harping on, that kind of prayer which just sits with God. And whether we feel it or not, lets God love us. Now, what better way to love God than letting God love us?